we are continuing a series called The Christmas Tree. How many people you got your tree up already? How many people you don't have your tree up? No, I'm just playing. Don't raise your hand. I'm just neither one. I don't know what that means. Okay. How many people you like a live tree every year? Anybody? How many people like fake trees? Don't like any trees? If you're like us, we had to go to a small tree because our dog eats all the stuff off of it, and when they're a Great Dane, they can reach up really high, so we have to put it up on the fireplace. And anyway, a whole long story. But it's ruined Christmas, so anyway, this is what it is. Okay, so we'll get off that. So what is this series about? Why are we talking about the Christmas tree? Well, we want to help prepare you for Christmas by talking about a Christmas tree that is in the Bible. You might not realize it's there, and it's not anything to do with a physical tree. It's the family tree of Jesus Christ himself, and it's found in Matthew chapter 1. It may be something in Matthew 1 that when you've read it, if you've ever read the Bible, if you turn to the book of Matthew, in Matthew chapter 1, it has a whole lineage, and maybe you read through it, or maybe you breezed through it, or maybe you thought, I don't really understand these names, so like most of us, you kind of skipped past it and got to the Christmas story part. And sometimes we don't realize that some of the greatest part of the Christmas story is found in the lineage of Jesus Christ. Not only the reason why Matthew gave it, he gave it for a couple reasons. One is this, is that Matthew gave his lineage to prove his legitimacy to the Jewish people, to say Jesus has the legal right to be Messiah. That's what he was doing. But it's more than that. There's names that are left in the lineage that didn't have to be there, because he didn't mention everybody in the lineage of Christ, just like, hey, you just didn't have enough time or enough space to write down everybody. Some of the people weren't just not notable, not hiding anything, just didn't write them in. Well, what I was more interested in is some of the names that he left in that you would say, hey, if these people were in my family tree, I would probably have left these names out. Being that you left some names out, leave these out. Anybody have somebody in your family that you would want to leave out of the tree? Anybody, that person's here and you're going, if we were to write our family tree, you wouldn't be in it, right? We just kind of brush that off to the side, right? They had 3 kids. We're not going to mention them by name because, anyway, you get the idea. And that's kind of where we're at here. And so what we're doing is we're picking up some of these names that it's almost like ornaments on a tree, where you go, hey, anybody got ornaments on your tree that you say, hey, these are the ones that they mean something to us, but anybody else looking at it would go, what in the world is that? And I have a feeling that's where we come across some of these names that normally we would go, who is that? And if you knew who they were, you'd say, man, why did you include them? And all of a sudden you realize that the family tree of Jesus isn't just about proving his legitimacy, but it's actually showing why he came. And there's a whole story that could help us not only in the future, but in your life right now. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to think through this lens as we get ready to look at another ornament off the tree. Last week we started with a lady named Rahab, who really didn't seem like she belonged in the lineage of Christ, but yet she is. But this time we're going to pull another ornament off. And as we do, I want you to think through this lens. I want you to write this question down. And it's this: what would you do? What would a person like me do if I really believed and I really trusted in God? What would I do if I really trusted in God? What would a person like me do if I trusted God in my situation, in whatever you're facing today, good or bad, or the situation you're in right now? Or maybe you came here today and you're going, hey, I'm facing something right now, and my question for you is this, is in your situation, how would you respond if you really trusted God? And I want us to look through that lens as we look at a story in the Bible that is super, in my mind, out of place. The person we're going to talk about today seems so random, I can't even tell you, because of where she falls at in the New Testament, in this lineage. Like, what is she doing here? But also in the Old Testament where she falls, and when I tell you where she's at, it's like, what in the world? How did she get a whole book of the Bible? It just doesn't seem to make sense. In fact, I've never preached on this person before, but it's been really interesting to me to find, okay? So turn with me to Matthew chapter 1. Matthew chapter 1, in verse 5, we're going to skip down to verse 5, and here's what it says. It says, Salmon, the father of Boaz. So before this, it was actually given Jesus' lineage, and it said, hey, this person from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and it started listing all the names. And then when we get down to verse 5, it says, Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. That's who we talked about last week. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. That's who we want to talk about today. You could circle that word Ruth. Who is she? Where did she come from? Why is she in the Bible? Why out of all the people that he could have named, he didn't mention very many ladies in here, but she's one of the ones that he highlights. And when you hear about her, you're going, what is she doing here? Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about Ruth. Let me tell you the time period she comes in. So last week we talked a little bit about that Moses was kind of a big deal to say he was a leader that led the children of Israel when they were slaves in Egypt. The children of Israel were slaves in Egypt in ancient times for 400 and some years. And Moses' job was to say, hey, he went to Pharaoh, the ruler of the world, and he said, let my people go. And Pharaoh said no. And then he had plagues, and then finally they let him go. And then they journeyed to Israel. And it took them about 40 years to get there. There's a whole long story. And you can find that in the book of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, this huge exodus. And then we get to the time of Joshua that we talked about last week, which is now they got to the promised land, the great leader dies, and to go into the promised land, guess what? There are people occupying the land. So you're thinking, hey, I'm a slave, and now I'm getting ready to go into this promised land that God has promised us, that he gave it to Abraham, and he said it's ours. But guess what? There's occupants in the land, and they're not happy to see you. They're kind of like if you watch, I just started watching Star Trek again. I don't know if anybody watches that, but the Klingons, right? The Klingons exist, and they're there. They called them something different. They said, hey, they're Canaanites, and they're Moabites, and they're parasites. Okay, you get the idea. But anyway, sorry, I don't know why I say that every time. I can't say Pizite. That's one of them. And there's a whole bunch of ites. It was not popular being ite. And God said in the book of Deuteronomy, he said before they went in, utterly destroy them all. Now, I want to just explain it because a lot of people get confused by that. They're kind of like, how could God do that, right? I mean, what, is God a racist and he wants a genocide? No, that's not it. These people were extremely wicked. If you looked at the things they did, you would say the same thing. You would say they really need to be destroyed. There really needs to be justice. And God's justice was he was sending his people back to occupy, but first they had to remove these horrible people from the land. I mean, I could tell you a few things. They would offer their children in the fire to their gods. That's the least of the things that they would do. They would take their babies and throw them into the fire to worship their horrible gods. That was just one little thing. There was many other things that I can't even talk about. It would make you sick if I told you what they did. So they come back into the promised land, and now they occupy it under Joshua, and then now they're free, right? So maybe you don't know what it's like to be a slave or to have a time of when life was so bad, and now you have freedom, and now you have prosperity, and now your fields are doing well, and the land is doing well, and you're living the dream that you thought one day you would never have. And how many people think, and now it's a utopia, right? I mean, like, it's just, this is the best time ever. I mean, God is ruling the people, and everything is well in the land, and you have no worries. And what happens after a couple generations? You know what happens? After you get prosperous? Anybody ever had that happen? Where it's like, I got prosperous, and I thought everything was going to be great, but then I'm still there, right? And I messed it all up. Anybody ever done that? Where it's like, I thought that if I got all this, then I would finally be happy. Then I got all this, and then I really messed up, right? I mean, it's like, man, I'm still there. I still have all my addictions. I still have all my stuff. And they ended up messing it all up. And so during the prosperity was the worst thing for them. So when they were slaves, they were worshiping God. But when they got prosperity, they forgot God, and they started worshiping other gods. Or they started saying things like, we did this. And they forgot all about God, and they started sinning against God, and they started to marry some of the ites. And they started worshiping some of the ites gods. And then what happens is God pulls his blessing off of them, and then he raises up, then they would be taken as slaves to the ites, right? The Moabites and whoever else, Philistines, all kinds of other people that are there. They would be taken as slaves, and then what would happen? Then he would raise up, then they would pray to God, God, please, we ask for forgiveness, and God would say, okay, and so he would raise up a deliverer that's called a judge. And that's where we get the book of Judges. Maybe you didn't know. And so this cycle that happens in the book of Judges goes like this. The people would be free and have prosperity. They would forget God. They would become complacent. They would start to sin. God's blessing would come off of them, and another country would come and take them as captives. Then they would say, hey, God, please forgive us for what we did. He'd raise up a judge, and then they would repeat that process over and over and over for hundreds of years. That's exactly what happens in the book of Judges. And this is the time of Ruth, okay? There's a book that falls between the time of the judges and the time of the kings, and it's called the book of Ruth, and it seems so random because everything else is about a chronological story that's happening, and now all of a sudden there's just a person that's thrown into it That's just a book about a person. And it goes like this. It goes from Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and then 1st and 2nd Samuel, which is a chronological book. And it's like, where did she come from? Why is this story important? But I have a feeling for somebody, this is probably going to be one of the most life-changing moments in your life. That God is about to tell you something from the story of Ruth that could change everything in your life. So to understand the story about Ruth, I have to give you just a little bit of the storyline. It doesn't start with Ruth. It starts with a lady by the name of Naomi and her husband. I would tell you their names, but they're not really relevant to this, so you can read about them for yourself in the book of Ruth. Here's how it kind of goes. Naomi and her husband were Jewish. They lived in Israel during the time of the Judges. And this was one of those times where the blessing of God had kind of came off of them, and the land had a famine, which means there was not enough food to go around. We haven't experienced that in our country. You know, right now you might be feeling that because you're like, hey, it's lunchtime, hurry up. But they were experiencing real famine where people actually died of not having enough food. What do you do when you don't have food? What do you do when times go from bad to worse? This is the question. What do you do? And let me tell you what they did. They were good people. Naomi and her husband were both good people. And they had 2 sons, and they decided, hey, for the good of our family, we're going to move away from Israel because there's no food here, but there might be food in another place called Moab. Now, that don't make any difference, but let me tell you who lives there. The Moabites. You get it? They're ites. So you leave the chosen people of God to go and do something he told you not to do. And you go and you live over there. But the way you're doing it is you're going, but you just have to understand there's not enough food and I've got to take care of my family. And so you're not really trusting God. You're trying to come up with a solution to your problem. You ever done that? Where it's like, you know, I know what God says, but you just have to understand this is how I have to do this. That's what they were doing. And they get there, and guess what? Their sons, as they grow up, they do live, but they end up marrying Moabites. And God had told them, don't do that. Because these people, not because he was a racist, but because he was saying, hey, they have other gods and they'll turn your hearts against God. And that happened many, many times. And so they were good people, but their sons married Moabites. And Naomi and her husband were kind of watching their family kind of dwindle down a path to go, we didn't mean to end up here, but here we are. It's like, I don't know if I've had that experience in my life where it was like, I didn't mean to end up there, but it was like, I started with, hey, I didn't save up enough money to have an emergency fund, and then my tires went out, and I had to use a credit card. You ever had that? It's like, I got to, because I got to have a card to go to work, and I end up using the car for something else, and then I use it for other things, and then it charges up, and now I can't pay the bill, or something bad happens, and then you end up consolidating, you know, one card to another card, and then you start flip-flopping cards, and then you have a house, so you say, hey, let me pull out the equity of my house to pay off my card, right? Anybody else? Everybody's looking at me so spiritual, but I know your story, right? I mean, this is the American way, right? I mean, hey, debt, man, I'm helping the economy, right? I mean, after all. And then it got really bad where I can't pay it off at all, right? And it's like when I remember waking up one day and just realizing, how did you get here? That's exactly what happened to Naomi and her husband. And just when you think it can't get any worse, believe me when I tell you today, some of you guys are thinking, it can't get any worse. It's just about as bad as it can be. Then her husband and her boys die. Just when you think it can't get any worse, what do you do? What do you do when things go from bad to worse? Now it's really bad. And Naomi goes, hey, you know what I need to do? I'm going to go back. Maybe she didn't make that decision. Maybe her husband did. I don't know. But she goes, I'm going to go back to the land of Israel to be with family. Right? That's what you do. But you know what? She's got a problem, because here's the problem. Her daughter-in-laws are with her, and they want to go back, but they're not the right people to go back, right? They're Moabites. And if I go back, you know, it's like when I send out my Christmas card or my Hanukkah letter or whatever they send back then, right? I'm going, hey, we didn't include that in our little letter we sent to you this year. We didn't tell you that our sons are married to Moabites. We didn't say that, right? We drew a picture and kind of drew the grandkids, but we didn't tell you that they're from Moab. Right? You just hadn't seen us in a while. We're kind of traveling a little bit, you know, that kind of. But if I go back with Moabite girls, but you see, Naomi, it wasn't just about impression, although it was a shame for her that they had done this. It was sin, and now it's coming to fruition that now everybody's going to know. I don't know if you ever had that moment where it's like, it's bad enough when you know your situation, but now everybody's going to know. You ever had that occur? And now everybody's going to know about us. Everybody knows the mistakes that we made. And so she encourages her daughter-in-laws to go back to their families. I'm going to go back home. You go back to your families. And I don't think it's because Naomi cared what other people thought. I think it's really this. I think she was trying to protect them. She goes, if you come back to Israel, let me tell you something. You're going to be a Moabite living in a Jewish world. You've never experienced racism to that extent. You don't know. You'll be judged as soon as you walk in. It's not anywhere close to any type of ethnicity problems that we've ever encountered here. If you walk in, they're going to know you. You can't hide it, right? I mean, you're from Moab. It's like, last week we said, it's like people from the north coming to Zuni. Well, this is like people from Zuni going up north. We just don't blend in, do you? I mean, right? Right? I mean, I know. I mean, I went to Vermont a couple years ago to go skiing, and you know what? They recognize, they're like, you're not from here, are you? We recognize the way you talk right away. A Moabite can't fool them. We know what you are, right? And after all, aren't you the people that God said to utterly destroy? What are you doing here, right? This is what it's going to be like. And so one of the daughter-in-laws says, fine, I'll just go home then. No problem. Mother-in-law, I love you, but I hear what you're saying, and I'll go home. And another daughter-in-law by the name of Ruth, that's who she is. Here's what she says. I want you to see it. Ruth chapter 1, verse 16. It says, but Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. I want to pause there for some of the church people in the room. If you're not a church person, you don't have to listen to this. But if you're a church person, you can lean into this. We sing a song, maybe you never knew where it came from. Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. I will follow you. You know the song? That's where it comes from. Maybe you didn't know that. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Ruth, in this moment, shows more maturity than anyone. She has a moment where she does something that changes the course of her life. And believe it or not, you might not understand this, but it changes the course of your life too. It changes the course of the life of the world, what she makes in this split-second decision. Because here's where she's at. Ruth is in a situation where life has gone from bad to worse. Anybody ever had that happen? And when we go from bad to worse, here's what you can do. I don't know if you know, but this is what she didn't do. We typically tend to look for blame during those times. Is that right? I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. But if it was me and you go, man, my life went from this to this, and this to this, and now I'm about as low as I can get. You know what I'm looking for now? I'm looking for somebody to blame, and there's lots of blame to go around. So the first thing we do is we look at other people, and we go, it's your fault. You know what? It was my husband that died. It's his fault. I'll throw him under the bus because he's dead anyway, and I'll just say it was his fault. A lot of us do that, right? You can do that. It's the government's fault. If Israel hadn't sinned against God, if our politicians weren't so horrible, it's their fault, and that's why I'm in the situation that I'm in. If they would only get themselves straight, I would be okay, and I wouldn't have done the bad things that I did, but it's their fault, right? It's blame. It's blame. By the way, you could turn that on God, right? I mean, it's one thing that we sinned against you, but you took my family. You took my husband, but more than that, you took my boys. You don't know what that, I mean, we know what it means today if we lost a child, but in those days for a woman, that is my whole hope. It's not just in their day, it's our day too, right? Some of you guys have lost children, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, and I know how dangerous it is for me to even utter these words. But when you're looking at this, you're going, hey, I know exactly what you mean. They were my hope, and now all hope is lost. What do? And now I blame not only other people, but I blame the one who really is at fault, God himself. Is that right? How could there be a God? How could there be a good God if this is who he is and he turns his back on me? Right? Blame God. Or maybe you do, like several of us, you blame yourself. Right? It's my fault. And you get stuck in guilt and you turn to a vice or you turn to other things, but you get this time where you go, hey, when things go from bad to worse, there's got to be blame. And if I could find the right person to blame, if it's other people or if it's God or if it's me, then I can finally be right. And no amount of blame in the world is going to fix your problem. Did you know that? This is what you need to know. Ruth got it. That's what I'm trying to point out to you today. But Ruth said, don't urge me to leave. You know what I'm going to do, Naomi? I hear what you're saying. I don't know what it will be like for me, but I can only imagine that a Moabite living in a Jewish world is not going to be cool. But I'm making a decision right now. To not place blame. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to trust God. Number one, you want a great lesson to take from the life of Ruth? Number one, what do you do when life goes from bad to worse? Don't blame. Instead, trust God. Some of you, this is going to be the greatest thing that will ever happen in your life. If you'll get this, your life can go on. Because you might not realize that Satan's greatest weapon, you want to know what it is? Offense. Because if he can get you stuck blaming, you won't do anything, right? If you're constantly blaming other people, you'll never have joy in your life because you're constantly blaming. And you know what I'm talking about, right? Because every time you see that person, your blood pressure goes up a little bit, doesn't it? Every time you see that person, every time that thought comes about that person, it takes you a couple hours just to calm down, right? You see them, you hear about them, you saw them on Facebook, then all of a sudden you see their life is blessed or whatever it is. Your blood pressure just, right? Is that you? If it is, you might want to lean into this. God, others. By the way, it typically goes hand in hand. Regret and resentment go hand in hand if you didn't know. But you know why they go hand in hand? If you blame other people, more than likely, you have a lot of guilt going on too. And I can tell you why. Because you're looking someplace to place blame, and blame is never going to help you, only trusting in God. And that's exactly what Ruth demonstrated. But I want to give you an exercise that might help you a little bit. It's helped me in my life. If there's ever something that I've struggled with in my life, it's blame. Blaming other people, because it's certainly not my fault. And blaming myself, blaming God. And I had to learn something, and this exercise kind of helped. Maybe it'll help you, I don't know. But it goes like this. Ruthlessly interrogate your own reality. It doesn't mean, like a lot of people think, hey, if you're doing that, then you're just letting everything go and you're not really dealing with your situation. But what you need to do is you need to take the memory or the thought or the thing that's bothering you and let it play out like a movie. But this time you're in the passenger seat. You're not in the driver's seat. You're in the passenger seat in the car. And you just need to watch it, just like a movie. This is what happened. When you get to the end, then what you want to do is you just want to take out a piece of paper and write down. Don't be too judgmental. Don't judge why. Just judge what happened. Hey, that person did this. That person did that. I did this, and I did that. It's amazing what you find out when you watch it again. Don't judge. Don't say, hey, they were wrong, and just go off on a tangent. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is just look at it for what it is. This is what happened. This is what occurred. And then write down and just say, hey, yeah, that person, what they did was wrong. What I did was wrong. And if they were wrong, you need to go back through that again and forgive them. And if you were wrong, you need to go back through it and forgive yourself. Because here's what I know. Blaming is never going to help you. You see, what Satan wants you to do is he wants you to get stuck in a situation that says, hey, I'm so mad at them and I have every right to be. You will never be more vulnerable in your life than when you get into a situation where you have been done wrong. When life goes from bad to worse, there is no situation where you will be more vulnerable to do what is wrong next. Because I can tell you how many people say, you know what, the reason why I did this, believe me, Naomi understands. The reason why we ended up here was because this happened, and because that happened, we had to do the we had to do the wrong thing, and then we start looking for places to blame, and then we get stuck in blame, and Satan is sitting there going, I've got you. Because you might be the greatest person like Naomi, but if you get stuck blaming, let me tell you what's going to happen. You're going to be stuck. And what Ruth demonstrates in this story is this. Ruth demonstrates that she says, look, I know what's occurred. And I know I have no idea what I'm about to face, but here's what I know. You know what we got to do, Naomi? You're the most godly person that I know. And we're going to help each other. I'm going to lean into the most godly relationship that I have because I realize that there's going to be times that I can't be objective. And I realize there's going to be times that you can't be objective. And I'm not going to leave you, and you're not going to leave me, and we're going to do what God wants together. And the way we trust God is we lean into godly relationships, a relationship with God and a relationship with godly people. And it's amazing what happens. And I want you to see it today because I got a feeling this is where somebody's stuck today. Okay? I want to tell you that. If you want to know the purpose of church, you want to know what it is? It's to connect you with those relationships, to connect you with God and to connect us with each other. That's why we have small group. That's why we do church the way we do, because we understand that this is the only way it works. And some of us, we're trying to do it ourselves. And we go, hey, it's enough just to have the promises of God. You know what? Naomi had the promises of God, but she leaned hard into self. She had messed up. And what Ruth did was she said, hey, where you go, I'll go. We're going to be a unit. And so when we go back to Israel, whatever we face, we're going to do it together. I have no idea what we're going to face. Neither do you. I just wanted you to see that today because I got a feeling for somebody, this is the big thing. And the reason why I wanted to show it in the book of Ruth is this, is that so far in the book of Judges, if you look back at their time, nothing good happened in the life of Israel. It was a cycle that continued on and on and on. But in the book of Ruth, this was a pivot point. If she hadn't done this, none of the rest of this story would have unfolded. That's what I want you to see. I have a feeling in your life right now, if this is where you are, there is a pivot right now that's going like this. You have a fork in the road and you get to choose. Do you want to blame or do you want to trust God? Because you can't have both. You cannot have both. If you choose to trust God, I want to show you what would happen, or at least what happened in the life of Ruth. Okay. We'll turn to Ruth chapter 3, verse 18. Before we go there, I need to kind of explain a little bit about the story of Ruth, so you can kind of understand how it unfolds. So they go back to Israel, and luckily Naomi's friends, because Israel was in a bad state, they really didn't say much bad about Ruth. It was all, like a lot of times you anticipate people talking and all this stuff, and they really didn't care. It wasn't as bad as they thought. They might not even know she was a Moabite. I think they did. But they get there, and for Naomi, it's different because she remembered when Israel was better. She remembered the generation of people who had occupied, they had come from the wilderness journey and they had come into the land and God had prospered them, and she remembers that from her parents. But it ain't like that now. It's not like that now. And she gets in there and she realizes it's not good. It's not good. It's not the nation I remember. And it's poor. And I'm coming back poor. It might not be everybody's poor, but I'm poor. I don't know if you ever had that where it's like you had money at one time and now you don't. And now life is a lot different. You're not living in a nice place like you did one time. I've done that where I helped somebody move from a nice place to a not so nice place. And they come in and you just hear that sigh. It's like, whew, right? You just look around the room. It's like, I remember this in college. I didn't think I would be here as a middle-aged person. I just didn't think that. This is where they're at. And she comes back. And she tells Ruth, and Ruth leans into her, and she leans into Ruth, and Ruth says, I need to get a job. What do I do? And Naomi says, here's how you can make some money. There's a custom where we're at that if you go out and they're picking the fields, right? They're harvesting the fields, kind of like we see in our area. Then if you want to, they allow you, after they've harvested the field, to come back and glean the fields. It means whatever's left over, the poor people could come and collect. And it was actually, it made a living, and it gave you enough money to, subsistently live. And so she said, but don't go to this end of the town because I know what they are, and I know these people will take advantage of you because there's a lot of people that would take advantage of you. And Ruth was a very beautiful woman, and they were like, don't get around these guys because they'll do bad stuff to you. But this field would be safe. And so she went over here, and she went and she gleaned this field. And she would bring home food. And it happened to be that while she was gleaning the fields, that a man that owned the field noticed her. She was beautiful, right? And he saw her. And I believe that he kind of fell in love. I know what that feels like. It was like the first time I met Marie, it was the first time I went back to church. I had been out of church for a while. And I came to church, and I looked up on stage, and there was this girl that was singing. That's pretty much all I ever heard. A lot of people say, oh, you went there because Pastor Jim's message. I didn't even hear his message. I only saw her, and the only reason why I came back was because of her. And that's kind of this is what happened with this guy. And he looks at her, and it's not creepy, but he starts to watch her, and he starts to ask about her. And he's not rushing it, right? It's kind of like a dance that you do when you're kind of whatever, and before he even meets her, and he finds out who she is, and he goes, yeah, I know who Naomi is. And he goes, here's what I want you to do. I want you guys that are harvesting my fields, I want you to drop some grain. You know what I mean? I don't even want her to have to pick it. I just want you to drop it. And so here she comes. Ruth is coming home, and she has a whole ton of grain. And so Naomi's kind of like, what is happening? Because, like, you don't get that much grain, Ruth. I mean, like, that's not normal. She's like, I don't know, right? And then he kind of approaches her. And they kind of start this kind of romance that happens. Nothing immoral, just a great romance. In the middle of the Bible, between the time of the judges and the time of the kings, is written this story. And here they are taking time for romance. And it actually is explaining that. And then finally, this guy, after watching her for a while, he says, hey, I need to tell you something. You know, they're actually kind of dating a little bit. That's kind of like in their day, whatever. And if you've ever lost somebody, then you would understand maybe how this feels. Like Naomi or Ruth had been married before. So there's a vulnerability that comes to go, I don't know if I'm going to allow myself to love another person. And this man is very patient, and he's a little bit older. And they just take their time. It's amazing. And they start to have these feelings. And now she's starting to have feelings for the first time again. You know what I'm saying? And she kind of has hope. And then he comes to her and he says, hey, by the way, I could be your kinsman redeemer. We're going, what? Like, if you're saying that, I'm saying the same thing. It's like, what is that, right? And it's going, hey, in the Jewish custom, they had something where they would say, hey, a family member of the family, because he knew this family, that in their tribe or whatever, they would say, hey, if you're not married, you would take on somebody else's wife that if they died, to help them out. And it was kind of a nice thing to do, but sometimes it didn't work out because it's like, hey, you can't just kind of make those things work, right? I mean, you kind of get stuck with somebody. And but in this case, they loved each other, and she's like, yeah, let's do that, right? I mean, like, because this is a Cinderella story or a Pretty Woman story. I mean, it's like, she's poor and he's rich and he's a little bit older, but not in a bad way, but they actually love each other. And then he says, yeah, but here's the problem. There's somebody else that's closer related to you, and he might have to be your kinsman redeemer. That messes up the whole story, don't it? And this is the part that I want you to see that comes out of the book of Ruth. God didn't have to tell this part of the story, but he does. And because here's what happens is you have been struggling for so long, and now here's the chance that you might finally get a little bit of happiness in your life. And then he comes back and he says, yeah, but I don't know if I can do that legally. And Ruth comes home to talk to her mother-in-law, and she's like, you're not going to believe this. I mean, everything is going so well, and now he says, I got to go check on this other guy, and I don't know if I'm going to like that person. And why would, you see how it's starting to go? And Naomi gives her some advice. And I want you to see it because it's advice for Ruth, but it's advice for us. Okay? Here it is. Ruth chapter 3 and verse 18. Then Naomi said, wait. You want to circle that? Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens. For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. The man will not rest until the matter is settled today. Naomi is wise. And this goes to show you at the beginning of the story, when things went from bad to worse, Ruth encouraged her, and then they leaned into each other, and she's like, hey, where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. And we're going to be kind of a unit. We're going to help each other. We're going to keep each other accountable. And so at this point, Ruth had given her mother-in-law some advice in the past, but now it's her turn, right? She's coming home and she's frantic. You ever had that? It's like, I have feelings and I want to get married, and I'm a very impulsive person. I can't talk. Me and Marie got married in 3 months after we met, so I can't really say anything about waiting. I'm not a waiter, I tell you. But what I've seen in this story and what I've seen in my life is that what he's saying is this. She's saying, hey, if this man is really serious about you, don't worry, it's going to work out. And if he's not, this is maturity. You shouldn't marry him anyway. And some of you, this is the most godly advice you're ever going to get in life. You're right on the precipice of messing up your whole life because here's what you're doing. You're trying to force it. And unfortunately, that's where our world has come, right? There's no more romance. It's all forced, right? It's just we got to hurry up. We got to do it so quick. We got to move the relationship. We can't wait on God. We can't wait. We have to do it in the wrong way, and it's messing up our lives. And anybody that's done that, right, you guys are going to say amen in just a minute. You say, hey, please don't do that, right? Take the time. If you've got to force it, God's not in it. You hear me? Can I say that again? Maybe you need to write it down. If you've got to force it, God is not in it. You're rushing God. And Naomi is saying, hey, wait on God. The second time you're the most vulnerable in life. You want to know when it is? It's a lesson that comes from the book of Ruth. When you're waiting on God. When you're waiting on God's blessing, number 2. Here's what I'm telling you to do. Don't rush. Instead, trust God. The way you trust God is to wait on God. It's to wait on God. This is not just a passage in the Bible. This is a principle found all throughout Scripture. I'll give you a verse you can look up. Isaiah chapter 40. You can write this in the margin if you want to. It says this, those that wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up on wings like eagles. They will walk and they won't grow weary. They will run and they won't faint. Right before that, you know what it says? It says warriors will fall. It means that there comes a time that no matter how much human strength you have, it won't help you. That you have to learn how to wait on God. Some of you guys, you're in relationships and you're rushing it. You're not spending the time to figure out. You're so, I got to move to the next step and we got to hurry up and do this. And you're pushing the doors open and God's saying, I'm not saying no, I'm just saying wait. Maybe I say it another way. Interested, but patient. See, that's what the guy was in this. And that's what Naomi was trying to help Ruth with. Hey, don't rush this. I know it feels good. I know where you're at. But here's what I'm telling you. And this is coming. You see, you just don't understand the maturity that's happening in Naomi's life. She's saying, I know what it's like because that's what we did in Moab. Thank God we got you, but we messed it all up. And I don't want you to do that. Let me tell you what you got to do. You need to wait on God. Wait for his miracle. Wait. You see, somebody's here today. And you're getting ready to try to push a door open that God's not ready to open yet. Can I tell you what God's saying to you? Something you don't want to hear. You see, if you're like me, you're going, I'll do anything but wait, right? I don't care if it's no. No is an answer, but wait. And God's saying, you want to know why you have to wait? Because you got to learn how to trust me. Read about Moses in the book of Exodus. You want to know what 40 years in the backside of the desert was for? To learn how to wait on God. So that when you are the leader, when you get up against them at the Red Sea, you don't try to make a plan, you trust in God. Because if you rush God, you're going to mess it all up. Amen? That's right. Some of you guys, you mess it all up, right? Right? You know it, right? You know it. And if you could tell your kids that, you'd say, hey, if there's anything I tell you, don't rush. Wait on God. Let the timing. It's timing, right? It's timing. It's timing. Before we finish this up, here's what I want to say. She does wait on God. It's awesome. There's another part to the story that I just want you to see just for a minute because I just find it to be really interesting. The man in the story, what in the world was he doing with Ruth? This is an upstanding citizen, an Israelite, who comes from a predominant family there, obviously. I mean, they raised him right. He had a lot of money. He's been waiting his whole life to find the right wife. What would make him consider a Moabite? Did you ever think of that? Let me tell you his name. His name is Boaz. And his mother is Rahab. Now, if you weren't here last week, maybe go back and listen. You'll find out who Rahab was. Rahab came from Jericho. And she was not an Israelite either. She was an Ite. Get it? She was a prostitute. How could Boaz be an upstanding citizen when his mom was a prostitute from Jericho, who God said to utterly destroy, but she saved the spies, and it said that after she saved the spies because of her act of faith in God, what did he do? He said she lives with them to this day. And last week I mentioned, and maybe you didn't realize how important this was, I said, and she lives with them. She's part of them. She's not outside. It's not like God freed her. She became an Israelite. And you know what? I think she raised a son named Boaz, and she taught him his whole life that said, hey, don't judge a book by its cover. Don't judge by somebody from where they've been. Judge somebody by where they're going. But you be patient, son. See, I've been around, right? Ain't nobody been around like Rahab's been around. And she said, son, I want you, when you pick a woman, you look at her and you not just look at how beautiful she is, but you watch her integrity and you look at what she does. And it doesn't matter if she's from Moab or not, right? I think Rahab had been dead and gone for a while when he met Ruth. But those words were in his head, right? So he gave her a shot. And it's one of the greatest love stories in the Bible. In fact, God took the time to link the time of the judges to the time of the kings with one story, 4 chapters, so out of place by a Moabite who made a decision to trust God. When things went from bad to worse, instead of blaming, you know what she did? She trusted God. And when it took so much time and it seemed like life was going to be good, instead of rushing, you know what she did? She trusted in God. And I want to tell you how the story ends. Here's what happens. Ruth chapter 4, in verse 13, it says this, so Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife. And when he made love to her, oh my, okay, sorry. Sorry, because you guys aren't reading this thing right. I can see you just reading it like, oh, he made love to her. Don't read it like that, right? You know why he made love to her? It didn't say he just had sex with her or they just had babies together. No, they had love together because they waited. You get the idea? They took the time for the romance. That's part of the problem that we have today. Nobody's taking the time to enjoy the romance of life. This is what love stories are made out of. Ruth, man, read it. It's awesome. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Verse 14, and the women said to Naomi, I just want to make sure you get what's happening here. Boaz, one of the most prominent people in Israel, married a Moabite. When they came back, you want to know why Naomi really didn't want her to come? She's like, I love you. A Moabite will never fit in a Jewish world. You've never seen racial prejudice. You've never seen ethnic prejudice like you've seen here. You'll never fit, but yet a woman, the women, let me tell you something. If you're in church, you know what that means, don't you? The church ladies. You know, if you get their approval, you're okay with everybody else, but if you don't, it's like behind the scenes, right? The women, I'm telling you, man, I mean, this is exactly what it's saying. The women said to Naomi, the people she was so worried about, the ones she thought, they'll never accept me, they'll never accept the sin that we had in our life. What did they say? They said, praise be to the Lord, who this day left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. Verse 15, he will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. They're talking about the baby. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, and who is better than 7 sons, has given birth. Do you see what God can do? Do you see why maybe we want to pull this ornament off the tree? Do you see why this isn't out of place in the lineage of Christ? It is the story of Christ. Verse 16, then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. In verse 17, the woman living there said, Naomi has a son. Wait a minute, that's not Naomi's son, that's Ruth's son. She's not related to Ruth by blood. God did it a different way. See, be careful. Be careful. You might be saying, my sons are dead, there's no hope for me, but yet God has a plan for your life. You just have no idea what God can do. The lady said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse. Do you know this story? And Jesse was the father of David. We'll stop there. You know David? King David? The one that killed Goliath? The one that became the greatest king in the history of the nation of Israel? The one that was said, hey, you will reign on the throne of Israel forever. Out of your line will come Messiah, right? And what does it say in the book of Luke? Do you know? Because if you read the Christmas story, then you'll know how this story goes, right? You might not know how connected it is, but now you do. That out of the city of David, right? there will come a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. And his great-grandmother was a Moabite named Ruth. And his great-great-grandmother was Naomi. I didn't say that. The Bible says that. Not by blood, though, right? Because two ladies made a decision that when times went from bad to worse, they didn't rush, they trusted God. Because when they had to wait, they didn't mess it up, they didn't rush God, they didn't rush, they trusted in God. It's awesome, isn't it? You know who the other great-grandmother was? Rahab. Are you seeing the story? Why he included this? Because some people would go, Matthew, have you lost your mind? You included a prostitute and a Moabite in the lineage of Jesus Christ. Why? Because he wanted to show this story that says if you will place your faith and trust in God, you have no idea what he can do in your life. There's one final point, though, that you got to get. There's one final time when we're so vulnerable. When you go from bad to worse, you're at your most vulnerable, right? When you're waiting, you're at your most vulnerable. Is that true? But there's one other time that we really don't know about, and we fool ourselves every time thinking that we can do this. But let me tell you something. They got it right, and everybody in an entire book of the Bible got it wrong. And I think it's why he included Ruth. Everybody in the book of Judges got this part wrong. In fact, the book of Judges ends by saying this. It says, and everybody did what was right in their own eyes, and they just kept sinning and sinning and sinning, and the nation of Israel got worse and worse and worse until the time of the kings, and then the kings were even worse than that, okay? But he includes the book of Ruth to teach us one thing. You know what they forgot? That after God blesses you, number 3, after God blesses you, don't forget him. You don't think it could happen. I visit a lot of guys that are in prison. You know, there's something I know about that. They don't think they'll ever go back. They don't think, if I ever get out, I'll never forget, right? And as soon as we get out, what happens? I've never been to prison, but I've had prisons in my life. And as soon as I get out, thinking, I'll never go back to that again. I'd never use debt again. I remember the day when I finally didn't use debt, but it was right after I thought, I can't believe I did it again, right? Anybody ever done that? You know why I did it? Because I forgot. I forgot God. I forgot the joy of God. I thought, hey, it could be about this. And be careful in your time of prosperity that you don't start trusting in prosperity. That's dangerous, right? That leads to excess. It leads to addiction, honestly, because it's like, I got to keep it. I got to control it. I got to control it. I got to control it. And he's going, hey, in the time of prosperity, when you're at your most vulnerable, you know what you got to do? Don't forget. Instead, trust God. That's good. Don't rewrite the story. Believe me. If you think churches are immune to that, I can show you some books on the shelf right now where pastors have rewritten the story that says, I did that. And God's laughing, right, from heaven, going, you didn't do that. The power of the Holy Spirit did that. Don't forget where you came from. Don't forget you were once a Moabite. Don't forget you were once the prostitute. Don't forget that you once lived in Jericho. Don't forget you were once down as low as you could get. Don't you ever forget it, because I'm telling you, it will unlock the greatest blessings of God if you don't forget it. But if you ever start trusting in prosperity, then when prosperity goes, guess what? You'll sink back into that hole, won't you? But you know the lesson that God's teaching? It doesn't matter if it's from bad to worse. It doesn't matter if you're waiting. It doesn't matter if you're prosperous. As long as you trust in God, you'll be okay. That means every circumstance. Get it? So here's my question for you today as we wrap up. What would a person like you do if you really trusted God? In your situation? I want to make sure you get this. Boaz was her kinsman redeemer. In theological terms, just to prove that I know a little bit. Boaz is a type of Jesus Christ. It means he's an illustration of what is to come. We have a redeemer too. And his name is Jesus Christ, and he comes from this very lineage. That's what it's wrapped in. He wraps it in the lineage to say, you need Boaz, don't you? You need somebody to come in and rescue you. And he's saying, that's me, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life, that Jesus came to redeem us, the same as this story. And if you want that, you can have it. It's yours. Don't leave here without it. That's the question you have to ask yourself. What would a person like me do in the situation that I'm in life? I can show you what Ruth did, and it made all the difference. When things went from bad to worse, she leaned into God instead of blame. And when she had to wait on God, you know what she did? She leaned into God instead of rushing. She leaned into God instead of forgetting. I don't know where you find yourself at today. But whatever that is, here's what I'm going to tell you. Trusting God will make all the difference. You can end up like the book of Judges. Read it for yourself. It's not where we want to go. But right in the middle of it, there's a story called Ruth. And it's one of the greatest love stories in the Bible to illustrate God's love for us. And if you'll take it, it's yours. Don't miss that today. Don't miss that this Christmas. I'm telling you, it will change your life. So I'm going to get out of the way. I'm going to let God do what only he can do. Let's stand for prayer.